Hi, I'm Dorian. I was the man behind the $53 million deal, the one they all toasted. But just hours after the contract was signed, my wife, she took off her wedding ring, slammed it on the table in front of her entire family, and said, "You're just a cheap IT nobody. Get out." They clapped. They called me dead weight. No one knew the signature on that deal was mine. And when she found out, 2 days later, she dropped to her knees, begging me not to ruin her. But you want to know the worst part? This wasn't about business. This was about a marriage built on control, a family built on lies. And the moment I finally refused to disappear quietly. I've never been the kind of man who walks into a room expecting attention. Most days, I'm fine staying in the background, doing the work no one sees but everyone depends on. That's what a systems integrity specialist does. You make sure the foundations hold so the big names can stand on top of them. I've always been comfortable with that role. Or at least, I thought I was. That Saturday evening in Fort Worth, I walked into the Kelm family's private dining room beside my wife, Marissa, and for the first few minutes, everything looked normal. The place smelled like grilled ribeye and bourbon glaze, the kind of warm, loud atmosphere folks around here enjoy on weekends. But the temperature in her voice on the drive over had already told me something wasn't right. She barely looked my way as we stepped in. Her relatives greeted her like she was the returning hero. Me? They gave me polite nods that ended too quickly, like they had somewhere better to look. Gavin slapped my shoulder and asked how the little tech stuff was going. Stanton chuckled and said something about me, keeping routers alive. They spoke as if I wasn't standing 2 feet away. Marissa didn't correct them. She lifted her chin, smiling at every compliment they gave her about the 53-moment ordeal she supposedly secured on her own. I tried to be proud, honest, I did, but I couldn't shake the thought that nothing on that project would have moved forward without my certification on the infrastructure report. That's just the truth of it. I didn't expect applause, but I thought, maybe she'd at least acknowledge it existed. Dinner moved along, forks tapping plates, conversations overlapping, and I kept quiet, feeling that tight pull in my chest get stronger every time they dismissed me with those half smiles. When Gavin stood up with his glass raised, I knew a toast was coming. He called Marissa a real leader for pulling off the impossible. The whole table clapped. I made the mistake of speaking. I actually reviewed the room fell silent mid-cheer. Stanton barked a laugh and said, "I always inflate what I do." A few cousins snickered. Marissa didn't hesitate. She leaned forward and cut me off, telling everyone I just handle low-level IT. Check boxes. It was said lightly, but it landed like a punch. Their laughter rolled over me. I sat still, but inside something cracked. Then came the moment I'll never forget. Marissa's expression sharpened and she reached for her hand. Before I grasped what she was doing, she slid off her wedding ring and slammed it against the wood. The sound was small, but it felt like it echoed straight through me. "You're just a cheap IT nobody," she whispered harshly. "Get out. You're ruining my night." Her relatives clapped, actually clapped, like this was some kind of show. I stared at the ring lying there near the water glass. For a few seconds, I couldn't move. Then I reached for it, closed my fingers around the metal, and stood up without a word. If humiliation has a temperature, that moment burned hot enough to leave a mark I'll carry for a long time. I walked out past the hostess stand and through the front doors. No footsteps followed. Not even a half-hearted wait. Outside, a flickering parking lot light buzzed overhead, casting broken shadows across the asphalt. The night air felt heavier than it should have. I leaned against my car for a moment, staring at the ring in my palm, wondering how I had let myself sink so deep into a family that never saw me as anything more than background noise. After a minute or two, I got in the car and pulled the door shut. The quiet inside felt strange, too clean, too final. Then my phone buzzed. A notification from the Dallas board system appeared on the screen. The final review packet for the $53 million deal had been forwarded, complete with a digital authorization code tied to my signature. Seeing that notification lit something sharp and steady inside me. The moment I saw it, I knew I wasn't walking away quietly anymore. I didn't even remember the drive. One moment I was staring at my phone under the dim yellow light of the parking lot, and the next, my headlights cut through the dark lot of an old building I hadn't visited in over a year. The lock on the door still stuck a little when I turned the key. Some things don't change. I'd kept this apartment, 1 bedroom, no frills, 2nd floor, facing a dry hedge, for emergencies. That's what I told myself when I kept renewing the lease, even after marrying Marissa. Back then, it felt harmless, smart even. But now, stepping inside, it felt like I'd been keeping a parachute packed for longer than I wanted to admit. The air inside was stale, a mix of dust and old carpet. I flipped on the hallway light and walked past unopened mail and a jacket still draped over the back of a chair from the last time I'd been here. Everything looked like it had been paused mid-breath. I dropped my keys onto the counter and sat down on the couch. It let out a tired groan beneath me, and I did the same. In my hand, I still held the wedding ring. I didn't cry. I wasn't that guy. But I sat there, staring at nothing, and let the silence press in. It wasn't just what Marissa did tonight. That was the final blow, sure. But the shame, the deep, gut-level embarrassment, had roots. I just hadn't wanted to admit how long they'd been growing. The ring hitting the table still rang in my ears. It was the sound of finality, the sound of being told, in front of a room full of people, that I wasn't worth defending, that I didn't matter. And the worst part? It wasn't new. I leaned back and stared at the ceiling fan, motionless and dusty. I remembered the first year we were married, Thanksgiving. We were at her parents' house. Long table, linen napkins, too much food, no one touched. Her company had given her a Leadership Innovator Award that week. Everyone clapped when she brought it up. Stanton raised his wine glass and called her the best thing to happen to the firm. No one knew the system behind that award was mine. I'd spent nights building it, testing it, on my own time. I'd done it because she said she needed help, and I wanted her to shine. When she told the table, "Oh, Dorian helped. He's my little tech helper," everyone laughed. So did I. Back then, I smiled through it. But that moment never left me. I just buried it. Now, in this room, with her ring in my hand and the staleness of my old life around me, I saw it all clearly. That moment, that was the start. The start of me shrinking so she could seem bigger. I looked at my phone again. The notification about the Dallas board still glowed on the screen. My name, my credentials, my timestamp. The deal existed because I made it compliant. No one in that steakhouse had any idea. And suddenly, I didn't feel small anymore. I stood up, walked to the desk shoved in the corner, and pulled out the laptop I'd left here. Battery. Dead, but the charger was still wrapped under the leg of the desk. I plugged it in, powered up, and opened the project files. Everything was there, clean, time-stamped, official. I clicked through the documents slowly. Every approval, Every revision. My signature sat at the bottom of each. I leaned back in the chair. They can pretend I was a footnote, but this deal, it had my name all over it. A strange thought hit me. Maybe they've gotten so used to stepping on me because I've spent years laying down first. I checked the clock, 2:14 a.m. I should have slept, but sleep felt like surrender. Instead, I lay down on the mattress on the floor. No sheets, just a blanket balled at the edge. I stared at the ceiling, letting the weight of the night settle. I wasn't angry, not exactly, not yet. But something was different. I didn't want revenge. I didn't want to scream or make a scene. I just wanted the truth to stand where they'd tried to erase it. I was done making myself smaller so they could feel tall. I stayed on that thin mattress until the first hint of light crept through the blinds. I hadn't slept. My mind kept circling the same thought. I'd let myself become small for too long. By the time the sun pushed over the rooftops outside the apartment, I felt steady enough to move. Not angry, not trembling, just clear. I grabbed my keys, slipped the ring into my pocket, and stepped outside. The morning air had that quiet stillness Texas gets on Sundays. As I drove toward the house Marissa and I shared, I didn't feel like I was going home. The closer I got, the more it felt like I was approaching someone else's life, not my own. I parked a little way down the block. The neighborhood looked calm, like it always did. Kids' bikes left on a lawn, sprinklers clicking away on autopilot, a couple walking their dog. Nothing about the world hinted at the wreckage of the night before. Our house sat there, bright paint, trimmed hedges. Perfect. That was always the word she used. I walked slowly toward the front door, giving myself time to settle. When I reached it, I unlocked it with the same key I'd used every day, but something inside me stepped back. Crossing the threshold didn't feel like coming back. It felt like stepping into a museum of someone else's choices. The house was spotless. Counters wiped, furniture arranged just so. Not a pillow out of place. I looked around and noticed how little of me existed here. A few books tucked in a corner. My work laptop hidden behind a vase she insisted on displaying. Even my diploma on the wall was placed somewhere you'd only notice if you turned fully around. I set my keys down and walked to the living room quietly. From there, I heard her voice. Marissa was in the kitchen, talking to her sister on speaker. Her tone was upbeat, polished, like she was presenting herself to the world again. She said, "The deal is exactly what the firm needed. I carried it from start to finish." I leaned against the doorway, just listening, not hiding, just giving myself a second before she saw me. She kept talking. "No, he'll be fine. He always gets dramatic and then settles down. I'm the one who has to keep things moving." So that was my role. The one who overreacts. The one who settles. The one who smooths things over so she can take her next step without friction. Her words didn't sting. They just landed with the weight of truth finally showing its face. Minutes later, the side door opened. Lorraine stepped in, carrying a folder. Her voice dropped low, but the walls carried it clearly. "You did the right thing last night. Men like him hold you back. You need to move quickly before he tries to turn anything around on you." Marissa answered, "I'm filing on Monday. I want everything clean before he comes up with one of his long explanations." I didn't move. I didn't breathe for a moment. They weren't shaken by what happened last night. They weren't even surprised. This had been planned. Something inside me shifted. Not sharp anger, more like a quiet line being drawn. I walked into the kitchen fully then. Both of them jumped a little when they saw me. Marissa's hand froze midair. Lorraine's mouth tightened. I said, "So that's where things stand." Marissa opened her mouth, searching for the right tone. "It's for the best, Dorian. We've been off for a while. You know that." There was no apology in her voice, not even hesitation. Just the calm certainty of someone who assumes the world will adjust around her decisions. I nodded once. "I'll get what's mine." She looked relieved, almost eager. "I'll pack everything and leave it on the porch." Lorraine gave me a tight smile, the kind people use when they think the conversation is settled, but they were reading the wrong man. I walked past them slowly, heading toward the room that used to be mine in name only. As I collected a few items, clothes, a notebook, my old watch, I felt something rise in me, a sense that the ground beneath all this was shifting. I wasn't reaching for the past anymore. I was taking stock of what needed to be carried forward and what didn't. When I walked back to the door, I paused for a moment and looked at the house. Every corner of it reminded me of the effort I poured in trying to belong. Effort that never earned a place. Stepping outside felt like releasing a breath I'd been holding for years. The door clicked behind me, but the silence that followed wasn't empty. It was clean, free of tension, free of performance. I didn't drive straight back to the apartment. Instead, I headed to a little cafe tucked behind a strip mall off 7th Street. I used to come here before Marissa and I got married, back when I worked freelance contracts and needed somewhere quiet with decent Wi-Fi and bottomless coffee. It wasn't trendy, but it felt like mine. No curated playlists, no overpriced matcha, just space. The place hadn't changed. Same scuffed floor tiles, same yellowing menu taped to the counter. Even the barista, Tori, I think her name was, gave me a nod like I'd only been gone a few days. I chose the table in the back, next to the outlet I always used, and pulled out my laptop. The login screen lit up, waiting for the password only my fingers knew by muscle memory. Once inside, I opened the technical files tied to the $53 million deal, the one that had upended my life in 48 hours. I pulled up Marissa's presentation deck, side by side with the infrastructure documentation I had spent 3 months refining. For years, I'd given her the benefit of the doubt, trusted her version of things. This time, I reviewed with a different lens. It started small. The framework she outlined for the investors. It was mine, not just similar. Identical, down to the line breaks. The same exact modular security stack I designed, except she'd swapped out some terminology to make it sound flashier. A few diagrams rebranded, but the skeleton underneath was the one I built from scratch, during long nights in that same apartment, with 2 monitors and a stiff neck. Even the mistakes, the ones I'd corrected last minute, were there, but twisted into strengths, positioned as adaptive thinking she brought to the table. It wasn't just omission, it was a rewrite, a calculated reshaping of reality that conveniently left me out. The bell above the cafe door jingled, and a moment later, Matteo walked in. He spotted me right away and gave a short wave before sliding into the seat across from me. "Didn't expect to hear from you on a Sunday," he said, nodding toward the laptop. "This about the deal?" I leaned back. "It's about everything." I told him what happened at the dinner, the ring, the public gutting, her family's clapping like they'd rehearsed it. I explained how I walked out, then found out she was planning to file first thing Monday. Matteo didn't flinch, just listened. Eyes steady, jaw clenched once when I mentioned Lorraine whispering about paperwork behind my back. "She's been minimizing you for a while, huh?" he finally said. Why wouldn't she do the same on paper? That question hit like a snap in cold air. We both leaned over the laptop as I scrolled to the metadata embedded in the file history. Line after line showed my original work, my timestamps, my directory paths. And then one entry stood out, a download from my shared cloud folder, dated exactly 1 week before Marissa's pitch. There it was. She'd accessed the final draft before anyone else, downloaded it directly from the source. The signature block, mine, was missing in her version. Digging deeper, Mateo opened the properties pane. Under author, her initials stared back at us. Not a formatting accident, not a fluke. It was scrubbed, whitewashed, rebranded. Man, Mateo breathed. She didn't just take credit. She built a stage on top of your work and made sure no one saw the foundation. I didn't speak. I couldn't. All the moments I'd told myself to let things slide. Every time I'd convinced myself that being supportive meant staying silent. They crowded in at once. The jokes at my expense. The cold dinners. The way she introduced me as in IT, like I fixed routers for a living. It hadn't been about love. It had been strategy, image management, risk control. And I'd been part of the risk. Mateo reached across the table. You need to document this, now. Back it up. Email it to yourself. Hard copy it. Whatever. She's not just cutting you out emotionally. She's lining up to erase you legally. I nodded slowly, fingers already in motion. I zipped the folder, encrypted it, copied it to 3 secure drives. One would go in a lockbox, one to Mateo, one to myself. I wasn't going to be caught off guard again. Later that afternoon, I found myself parked across from Marissa's office building. She always worked Sundays during deal season, something she told everyone was a mark of hustle. I knew her patterns well enough to know when she'd leave. And right on time, there she was, laughing as she walked out, holding a coffee in one hand, gesturing with the other while talking to some guy I didn't recognize. Not a flicker of remorse, not a shadow of reflection. She looked like someone who'd already rewritten the ending of our story and handed it in. I didn't feel broken watching her. I felt awake. I turned the keys in the ignition, rolled the window down halfway, and sat with that image a moment longer. She might have silenced me at the table, but she forgot one thing. That deal, the one she was parading around, it was hanging on one signature. Mine. And that truth stayed with me long after I pulled away from her office building. By the time I reached the apartment, the weight of Monday pressed against my chest like a storm rolling in before daylight. I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard her voice again, telling that coworker I wouldn't fight, that I never did, that by Wednesday, she'd have everything wrapped up. So when the first trace of dawn filtered through the blinds, I was already awake, sitting at the small table with my laptop open, the same files glowing back at me. I hadn't come here seeking comfort, just clarity. And today would require all of it. The digital trail hadn't changed overnight, but I scrolled through the documentation again. My signatures, my timestamps, my reviews. They were still anchored in the system exactly where they belonged. Yet something new caught my eye in the shared folder. A draft letter. Her writing. The phrasing stopped me cold. Mr. Blackwell held minimal involvement and lacked the capability to contribute meaningfully to project compliance. It wasn't signed, not yet, but I knew what it meant. She wasn't just building a life without me. She was laying groundwork to claim the deal entirely as her own, carving me out before anyone even thought to ask questions. A tension grew behind my ribs, the kind that makes you steady your breathing so you don't spiral. I closed the laptop slowly, trying to gather myself. That's when I heard a sudden, firm knock at the door, 3 short raps, then silence. I wasn't expecting anyone. When I opened it, Stanton stood there, shoulders broad, chin lifted like he owned the hallway. He didn't bother with a greeting. "We need to talk," he said flatly, pushing past me without permission. He glanced around the apartment with a sneer, as if the modest place validated every insult his family had thrown my way. "We want a clean break," he added. "Marissa doesn't need distractions this week. And you showing up at her workplace yesterday? Bad idea. Don't do it again." He said it like he was giving instructions to an intern. I held his stare. "You don't get to set rules for me." He gave a low laugh. "Come on, Dorian. You've always gone along with what's best. Don't start making this messy." He reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope. "You should read this." Inside, there was a separation agreement, unsigned but prepared. Every line was designed to strip me of rights. No claim to marital assets, no stake in anything tied to her business, acknowledgement that I had no involvement in her professional successes. Stanton crossed his arms. "Sign it before she files. It'll look better for you." It wasn't a suggestion, it was pressure disguised as courtesy, the Kelm's favorite tactic. "You're trying to erase me," I said quietly. He raised a brow. "Erase is a big word. Let's just call it simplifying." After he left, I sat on the edge of the bed, elbows on my knees, the envelope hanging loosely from my hand. Everything inside me shook, not from fear, but from the realization that this wasn't impulsive cruelty. It was coordinated, thought out. A plan formed long before last night's outburst. A familiar instinct tried to resurface, the one that always whispered, "Let it go. Make peace. Shrink yourself before someone does it for you." But I'd lived that way too long, and shrinking hadn't saved anything. Not my marriage, not my dignity, not my place in the deal I built. By late morning, I was in the car, driving toward Marissa's office again. This time, I wasn't going to storm in or make a scene. I just needed to see her without the Kelm family surrounding her like a shield. Inside the building, the receptionist barely glanced up when I entered. I took the elevator to her floor, my steps steady, my pulse controlled. As I approached the hallway, her voice floated through the air, bright, confident, careless. "He's not going to push back," she told someone. "He never does. By Wednesday, this will all be settled." Her laughter followed, light and dismissive. Something inside me shifted. Not a snap, not rage. Just a quiet understanding that the man she expected me to be no longer existed. I stepped forward so she could see me. The moment her eyes met mine, irritation flashed across her face. Not guilt, not fear, just annoyance, like I'd shown up to ruin her polish. "You shouldn't be here," she said under her breath. "Just sign the papers and stop dragging this out." Her coworker slipped away awkwardly, sensing tension. It left the two of us standing in a narrow hallway, air thick with everything unsaid. I studied her expression, not the practiced charm she showed others, but the sharp edges she reserved for me. All those years I mistook indifference for stress, criticism for concern, coldness for ambition. It all clicked into place. "You were never planning to fix anything," I said softly. "You were planning to remove me." She rolled her eyes. "Don't make this dramatic, Dorian. It's simple. We're done. And the sooner you accept that, the cleaner this will be." But I wasn't collapsing this time. I wasn't folding in on myself to make her comfortable. I straightened, feeling something unfamiliar yet grounding, a sense of self returning. "I won't sign anything," I said. "Not on your timeline, not under your pressure." Her jaw tightened. "You're making this difficult for no reason." "No," I answered. "I'm finally making it honest." I turned before she could reply, letting the words settle in the air between us. Each step away felt steadier than the last, like I was reclaiming pieces of myself I hadn't realized were missing. By the time I reached the parking lot, one thought echoed through me with the same force as truth. If she was willing to lie on paper, what else was she prepared to forge? That question clung to me as I drove back to the apartment, hands tight on the wheel, mind racing faster than the traffic lights. The sky was folding into dusk by the time I parked. The air was still, but my chest wasn't. I unlocked the door with a slow breath and stepped into that dim, quiet space. Temporary, like everything in my life had become. I didn't even take off my jacket. I powered on the laptop and sat at the kitchen table. Fear had a way of making everything sharp, like a light turned on too fast in a dark room. But this wasn't the fear of losing a marriage anymore. It was the kind that creeps in when you realize someone you trusted might be willing to burn down everything just to step over your ashes. I went straight to the files, all of them. Every document tied to the Dallas project, every email thread, every line of technical approval with my name on it. I downloaded duplicates to 2 flash drives and backed up another copy into a secure personal cloud I hadn't touched since grad school. She'd already tried to paint me out of the picture once. I couldn't let her delete me again. Then I texted Mateo. "Need a second set of eyes. Can you come by tonight?" He replied in less than a minute. "Be there in 30. Don't touch anything else." By the time he knocked on the door, I'd made coffee and cleared the clutter off the table, though the tension still hung thick in the room. He came in, wearing that same dark hoodie he always wore when he knew things were about to get serious. "You look like you haven't slept in a week," he said, setting down his laptop bag. "I haven't," I muttered, rubbing the back of my neck. "She's rewriting everything, Mateo. Not just in conversation, in documentation." He didn't flinch. "Then we document everything she didn't touch yet. Starting now." We both sat. No small talk. Mateo pulled up the project logs. I opened the cloud admin console. What began as quiet focus turned into something tighter, an audit, layer by layer, metadata, routing history, annotation timestamps. Digital breadcrumbs she probably thought no one would look for. "What's this?" Mateo muttered, leaning closer to the screen. He highlighted a section of the system log, 3 late-night sessions from the week before. All from Marissa's corporate credentials, all targeting the same files. Each session accessed the Dallas folder, opened your annotated drafts, and... Wait. He tapped harder. "These show deletions." He opened the action record, and there it was. Entire comment threads I'd written scrubbed clean. My initials removed from file histories. One session had even attempted to override my signature line with a new one, labeled MK. "The overwrite failed," he said. "System rejected it because of embedded encryption tags." "But she tried," I whispered. That was the moment something cold settled in my spine. She didn't just steal my work. She tried to erase every trace that I'd ever touched it. Mateo leaned back in his chair, jaw tight. "She's not just trying to take credit. She's trying to preemptively bury any defense you might have if this goes legal." I barely had time to absorb that before he opened a different folder, one I hadn't touched. This was in her shared drive, he said. Draft email, never sent, dated 2 nights ago. The subject line read, "Confidentiality breach, urgent advisory." The body of the message laid out claims that I had compromised system integrity, improperly stored company property, and posed a reputational risk to ongoing negotiations. "If she sends this to legal," Matteo said slowly, "you're not just out of the project. You're out of a job, maybe even blacklisted." My body went still, not tense, just still. All this time, I'd thought I was fighting to preserve a piece of dignity, a sliver of fairness, but she wasn't just leaving me. She was trying to make sure no one would hire me again. "She's prepping the kill shot," Matteo said flatly. "The public version of you, the competent one, the one who actually built the tech, has to vanish so the board believes she's the visionary." I stepped away from the table, hands on my head. The apartment suddenly felt too small, too quiet. I looked out the window at nothing in particular and whispered, mostly to myself, "I don't think I ever knew her." Matteo stayed silent. There was nothing to say. After a moment, I turned back. "We back up everything. Hard copies, external drives, passwords reset. Tomorrow's not just a presentation anymore. It's a line in the sand." He nodded. "Agreed. We make 2 binders. One goes with you. One stays sealed and time-stamped. You're not coming in as her husband. You're coming in as the guy with proof." We worked for hours, copying files, printing logs, verifying chain of custody trails. At some point, I realized the fear had been replaced with something firmer. I wasn't shaking anymore. The man who walked on eggshells had left the room. Around midnight, I zipped the documents into a weatherproof folder and placed it by the door. That's when the final thought hit me. A question I couldn't ignore. What would Marissa do when she realized I wasn't going to disappear quietly? She answered that question before 8 a.m. By the time I stepped into the lobby of the Dallas headquarters, the air already felt heavier than usual, like the calm right before a Texas summer storm. I wore the same navy suit I had during my first audit presentation years ago. It wasn't flashy. That was the point. I wanted the focus on facts, not flair, but I didn't even make it past the welcome desk before I saw her. Marissa stood near the reception counter with her parents, talking low to the head of security. Her mother glanced my way and murmured something under her breath, then chuckled. Marissa laughed too, like the joke was an inside one. Her father stayed quiet, hands in his pockets, eyes on the floor. Then the receptionist cleared her throat. "I'm sorry, sir," she said politely, "but we were informed you're not permitted on the executive floor today." I didn't flinch. I calmly reached into my folder and handed her a printed email. Board clearance, dated and signed by the Dallas review coordinator. She read it, blinked, then immediately nodded. "My apologies, Mr. Lorne. You're good to proceed." I gave her a small smile. "Thank you." I didn't look at Marissa as I passed. I didn't need to. Strike one. Down the hallway, past the paneled walls and motivational plaques, I could feel eyes tracking me. A few murmurs, but nothing direct, until a younger analyst, someone I barely recognized, stopped me near the second-floor elevators. "Hey, I just wanted to say I'm sorry about what happened," he said, awkward, almost whispering. I frowned. "Sorry for what?" He looked around, then pulled out his phone and showed me the screen. It was an internal memo, unsigned but sent from a PR inbox I knew too well. Marissa's family's firm. It claimed I had violated multiple data protocols, interfered with internal security systems, and put client confidentiality at risk. All of it untrue, none of it verifiable, but enough to cast a shadow. "It went out to department heads an hour ago," he added quietly. I stared at the screen, jaw tight. Not rage, not shock. Just that familiar metallic taste of humiliation at the back of my throat. The kind that doesn't leave easily. She was laying the trap before the meeting even began. As I walked the rest of the hallway, the whispers followed. Not loud, not cruel, but effective. Heads turned, eyes slid away, smiles that faded too quickly. I'd seen this before. It's what happens when people smell blood and don't want to be near the mess. This wasn't a misstep on her part. It was a campaign. Then, as I was adjusting my tie outside the boardroom doors, 2 members of security approached. Mr. Lorne, one of them said, tone formal. We've been informed your presence is not required today. I turned, measured. By whom? Your wife, sir. She stated this session is internal. Executive leadership only. My breath caught for half a second. Then I exhaled slowly. I reached into my case and handed them the sealed envelope Mateo and I had prepared the night before, containing all clearance documentation, signed authority letters, and a copy of the initial technical validation that bore my name. The taller guard flipped through it, face tightening with every page. I will need to confirm this with the board, he said, voice now less certain. Please do, I replied. Right then, the doors behind us opened and in walked Mateo. He flashed his access badge to the guards, then stepped beside me with a pat on the shoulder. You're fine, he said under his breath. I already talked to the coordinator. They're waiting on you. The guard looked even more uncomfortable now. He stepped aside. Apologies, sir. Mateo gave me a knowing nod. His presence, calm, confident, kept me grounded. For the first time that morning, I felt like I wasn't standing alone. But Marissa wasn't done yet. She came at me in the hallway outside the conference room, moving quickly, eyes sharp and voice low. You really think one signature makes you important? She hissed. You weren't even supposed to be here today. I looked at her hand, bare, no wedding ring. The same hand that had slammed that ring down on a steakhouse table like she was discarding a cheap souvenir. You forged my clearance block, I said evenly, and you tried to have me escorted out. Her eyes faltered. Not long, but enough. Enough to tell me she hadn't expected I'd find out. That flicker of fear, it was real, but just as quickly, she straightened. You never belonged in those rooms anyway. You were always the guy in the background. Know your place. I didn't answer, because the conference room doors opened right then, and a voice from inside called out, Mr. Lorne, we're ready for you. I stepped past her, not as her husband, not as the guy they used to overlook, as the one person whose signature was the foundation of the entire deal. And as I crossed that threshold, I had no idea Marissa had one more move left. Her most desperate one yet. She launched it the moment my name appeared on page 1 of the packet. I had just taken my seat near the far corner of the boardroom, intentionally staying outside the spotlight. When it happened, the room was still settling. Papers rustled. Coffee cups clinked. Soft greetings exchanged between executives. But the second the chair began with, "Let's begin," Marissa stood. She didn't wait for a cue. No polite transition. She moved like it had been rehearsed, because it had. "I need to raise a compliance issue," she said, placing a printed document at the center of the table with the kind of dramatic flair you see in courtroom TV shows. The room fell quiet. Her tone was flat, but the content was poison. She claimed I had compromised data layers, manipulated internal access, and jeopardized deal security. all of it echoing the same accusations Mateo and I uncovered just a night ago. Word for word. She even had the gall to suggest that my approval of the contract should be rendered invalid due to technical negligence. Across the table, a few board members exchanged looks, some confused, some guarded. I didn't see condemnation, at least not yet, but I saw what she wanted: doubt. Enough doubt to stain me. The chair, a composed woman in her 60s named Ellen Price, glanced my way. "Mr. Lorne," she said calmly, "do you wish to respond?" I nodded once. "Yes, thank you." I pulled the sealed envelope from my folder, set it down, and slid it across the table. In there, you'll find a time-stamped audit trail, full metadata, and unaltered logs tied directly to this project's approval path, including my signature and associated credentials. Marissa's gaze didn't shift, but I saw it, the way her jaw clenched ever so slightly. This wasn't part of her script. The senior compliance officer opened the envelope and began scanning. He turned to the IT director beside him and whispered something. Within a few keystrokes, they were both logged into the internal system. Silence returned, and then came the first shift in air pressure. The deletion attempts didn't come from his credentials, the compliance officer announced, eyes narrowing. They came from hers. There it was, the timestamp, the device ID, late night sessions, the IP address of Marissa's home workstation. The digital fingerprints weren't subtle. They were bold, almost careless. The room murmured, not loud, not panicked, but real. Executives leaned toward one another, brows furrowed. Marissa's posture began to stiffen, not rigid with confidence, but with rising panic. She spoke too fast. This is not accurate. Anyone could have used my login. I wasn't even... This is all twisted. Why would I sabotage a deal I've worked years for? Her voice pitched upward. The faster she spoke, the harder it became to believe her. Her parents weren't there to step in this time. Her usual safety net, board allies, firm, partners, familiar faces, stayed still, listening but unmoved. Then came the moment that broke everything. The chair finally opened the main contract packet and turned to the approval page. There it was, my name, my digital ID, my time-stamped, verified signature. Undeniable, clear. It was like the oxygen left her lungs. Marissa stared at the page, eyes wide. No words, no strategy. Just silence so dense it rang in my ears. Her lips parted, then closed again. The color drained from her face. "No," she whispered, more to herself than anyone else. He wasn't supposed to have that. He didn't... She stopped. Couldn't go on. The story she had spun for weeks, maybe months, collapsed under one page of undeniable truth. She sat back slowly, the fight falling out of her. But then she turned to me, not with fury, but with a kind of pleading I hadn't seen since long before our marriage began unraveling. "Dorian, please, don't let them think I'm the villain here. Don't let this destroy me." Her voice cracked. But remorse, spoken only after exposure, isn't remorse at all. It's panic. I didn't say a word. There was nothing to say. The compliance director finally broke the silence. "There is no indication of misconduct by Mr. Lorne," he said plainly. "However, the access logs show clear, unauthorized alterations made under your credentials, Ms. Lorne. That is now a matter for internal review." A ripple of discomfort moved across the table. Her reputation, carefully built and fiercely protected, had just fractured in front of the very people she depended on. The chair cleared her throat and moved the agenda forward, but the room's energy had shifted entirely. I didn't celebrate. I didn't smile. I simply sat there, steady and still, knowing this was far from over. But finally, I wasn't invisible. I wasn't dismissed. And the truth, for once, spoke louder than the performance. The boardroom was still, not with tension, but with a hush of people recalibrating what they thought they knew. I stood slowly, feeling every eye track me, not with suspicion this time, but with a cautious openness. The silence didn't demand force. It invited clarity. "My name is Dorian Lorne," I began, keeping my hands folded in front of me. "I'm the infrastructure specialist who validated the security framework for this deal. I conducted the final risk audit 3 weeks before approval. No theatrics, no anger, just the facts. I kept my tone measured. I wasn't there to shame anyone. I wasn't there for revenge. I was there because something had to be put right. And for once, I knew exactly how to do it. Before finalizing the approval, I embedded a secondary safeguard in the architecture," I continued. "It was a silent redundancy layer, intended to detect unauthorized data manipulation or deletion. It triggered quietly in the background during 3 late-night logins." The IT director nodded. He understood what that meant. Several others did too. "I didn't build it because I feared competitors," I added. "I built it because I sensed something off inside the project itself." I didn't say her name. I didn't have to. Behind me, a small sound broke the moment, soft, cracking. It was Marissa, crying. She didn't sob. She didn't throw herself across the table. She sat hunched slightly forward, dabbing at her eyes with the corner of her sleeve, her voice barely audible. "Please, Dorian. Please stop. We can fix this. I was scared. I messed up. Don't let this destroy me." She spoke like someone who just noticed the fire wasn't a threat. It was already burning down the house. But as I stood there, facing her and everyone else, something shifted inside me. A weight I didn't even know I was still holding began to fall away. "I'm not here to destroy anyone," I replied gently. "I'm here because the truth matters, even when it's late, even when it's uncomfortable." Ellen Price, the board chair, leaned forward and cleared her throat. "We'll recess for 10 minutes. Both of you, please wait outside." Marissa stood slowly, avoiding my eyes. I stepped back into the hallway and leaned against the wall. My palms were warm, but I wasn't shaking. Not anymore. 10 minutes later, we were called back in. The boardroom felt different. The air wasn't thick with tension. It was clean, almost clinical. The kind of atmosphere where decisions are made, not negotiated. The chair read from a printed statement. "Effective immediately, Marissa Lorne is suspended pending full investigation. Her involvement in PR strategy is paused. She will be removed from all executive decisions until this matter is resolved. No drama, no raised voices, just structure, just justice." But it wasn't over yet. The compliance director adjusted his glasses and tapped the packet in front of him. "There is one final discovery," he said, tone neutral. "A forged approval submission was attempted using Dorian's digital signature. The system rejected it. However," he paused, looking up. "The fingerprint scan was captured. It matched Ms. Lorne's." Marissa didn't gasp. She didn't argue. She simply sat back, shoulders collapsing inward. There was no spin left, no framing. Just the truth, plain and traceable. The meeting moved on, but, for me, it had ended. I stepped out quietly. In the hallway, Matteo was already waiting. "You didn't just speak," he said, clapping my shoulder. "You surgically removed the lie." That made me chuckle, my first real one of the day. Not bitter, not proud, just released. We walked slowly toward the elevator. Behind us, soft footsteps. Dorian. Her voice was thin, almost timid. I turned. Marissa approached with uncertainty that had never touched her before. Her expression wasn't defiant. It wasn't calculated. It was raw. "I'm sorry," she said. "I don't know why I did all of this. I lost sight of everything." The words landed like snow. Quiet. Too late to stop anything from freezing. Then, something I didn't expect. She sank to her knees. Not for the board, not for the company, for me. "Please," she whispered. "Don't leave me. You're the only person who ever stayed." I bent down, not to console her, but to meet her where she was, eye to eye. "You didn't want me to stay," I said quietly. "You wanted me silent. You wanted me gone. I just refused to disappear." She didn't respond. I stood up again and reached down, not as a husband, but as a human being, and helped her to her feet. Then I stepped back. A boundary had been drawn, not with anger, with finality. Outside the building, the sky had shifted, soft blue above steel glass. The breeze hit differently now, not triumphant, not cleansing, just new. I looked up, took a deep breath, and stepped forward. My phone buzzed. "Mateo, lunch? You need real food." I texted back. "Yes, and maybe a fresh start." Not all endings come with fireworks. Some come quietly, with a door closing gently behind you, and the sense that the sky ahead has finally widened.